Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour, the best game dev podcast on the planet. Today we're joined by Daedra Christopher, and we'll be talking about breaking into the video game industry.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear real stories of breaking in from real industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. Thank you, Real Sauce Doctor, for that beautiful dancing gif. This is, in fact, the very first episode of 2025, which means this is officially season 3 of the podcast. You'll hear a couple of new sound effects, and we are also working on improving our live streaming experience. So those who are watching not in Discord, things will be a little bit more beautiful soon. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host here on Discord, Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so feel free to swing by and join us for the next one and ask your own questions live as we go. We'd love to see you. I'm your host, as always, Willem Delbenthal, the headmaster of the Indie Game Academy, and joining me today is Daedra Christopher. Daedra is a senior multiplayer designer at ZeniMax Online. Don't ask for any more than that, though. She cannot tell us. And we will be talking about breaking into the video game industry, a fantastic place to start for 2025. Daedra, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. What are you having for lunch today?
Thank you so much for having me. I am having coffee with milk.
Earlier, when we were doing, our little audio checks, Daedra expressed concern that she was not, in fact, eating anything. And I said that was okay. I'm also having coffee with milk, although mine is soy milk.
Nice.
Is that okay? Do we have to fight about it?
No, we don't. No.
Okay, great. Awesome. Fantastic. Well, welcome to the show, Daedra. ZeniMax is one of those larger companies that a lot of really cool games have come out of. We'd love to hear, as always, your origin story. This is always the first question of the episode, and you are the first origin story of 2025. Daedra, could you tell us about where you are today and how you got there?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I'm originally from Texas, from Dallas, and I started my college career after like a long hiatus from school. I went back, and I was actually studying to be a doctor. And I started, being kind of a mature student. I was a bit older, and I was like, oh, do I really want to spend like my 30s, potentially 40s in med school as a resident, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure that I do. So I took a break during my class schedule and just started walking around campus. And I'm a huge architecture buff. Like, I'm a total architecture nerd. And I saw this like radio tower with this small building underneath it on campus at the University of Texas at Dallas. And I'm like, what is that? So I just started walking toward it. And I went inside and I saw all these like game posters. It was like BioShock and Mario and all these different video games. And I was
There was a
obviously
floating yellow exclamation mark.
Yes, I was a huge gamer, so I'm like, what is going on in here? And I asked the lady sitting at the front desk, I was like, what classes do you teach here? And she's like, we teach game development. And I was like, you can do that for a job? And she's like, you absolutely can. That was it. I was sold. So I signed up, and
That's all you needed to know.
that's all I needed to know. Yeah, absolutely.
Is a
So
thing.
then,
Check mark.
yeah, exactly. I went from becoming a cardiovascular surgeon to making video games, and I've never looked back. I love it. It's absolutely the best. And so I started off just teaching. I decided to go ahead and pursue my master's as well, because giving back to the community is something that's really important to me. And and then I got a call from 343 asking me, hey, do you want to work on Halo 6? I'm like, yeah, of course I do.
You
Is
had
that
to think
even a
about it. You were like,
question?
I don't know.
Yeah. So I worked on Halo Infinite, and then after that, we picked up and moved all the way to Washington State from Dallas, and then I taught my husband how to use Unreal during that time, and he then, because he was a photographer before and was in QA prior to us moving. He worked at Gearbox. And so, then he just really got into lighting. My contract with Halo ended, and we both got picked up by Raven, and then we ended up in the Midwest, and And I've worked on other places since then, but I've worked on Warzone, Call of Duty, and then I also, I worked at Ascendant for a little bit on their Magic shooter, and then now I'm at ZeniMax. So yeah.
Wow. Incredible. Okay, so I understand for the sake of the podcast, we don't want to spend too long on the origin story. We want to keep flowing. But I got a call to work on Halo 6 is a mighty short version of something that I assume is a little bit more complicated. How did that come about? How does one just get a call to work on Halo 6? And how can
Um,
I personally emulate it?
Yeah, so one of the things that, I'll talk about later is just having all of your job listing or your job search materials up to date, right? So
Mhm,
on my LinkedIn, I was constantly keeping my keeping my portfolio up to date, keeping my LinkedIn profile active, joining groups, actively connecting with other developers. And that's how they came across my portfolio,
mm,
which was just through LinkedIn. I've always been, I think aside from maybe one position, it's always been through LinkedIn. So
mhm,
being very active there is really important. Yep.
mhm.
So,
Amazing. So it literally was they reached out to you and were like, "Hey, you want to work on this?"
yep, absolutely.
Incredible. That's only happened to me once or twice in my life, and it's real nice. It's
It
real
is.
nice
It
when
is
it happens.
nice. It is.
Amazing. All right. Well, let's get into the topic of the day. So, we decided to talk here about breaking into the video game industry. It's something that this community cares about desperately. It's one of our biggest topics that we talk about here as well. And it's something that I guarantee 95% of listeners are wondering about themselves. Even if they are already gainfully employed, they're thinking about the next thing. So
Yep.
I would love that 101, that intro. How
Yeah.
does one break into the game industry?
Yeah. So one of the things that my upcoming book really discusses is, again, making sure that your job materials are always up to date, right?
Hmm.
But one of the things I really speak with my former students, current students, and even my mentees about is doing what I'm calling a skill check, right?
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is making sure that you understand the position that you're pursuing and that you're qualified for it. And that sometimes can be a really tough thing to do, right? So while I have been trained how to be a modeler, right? I know all of the technical skills that are involved. Am I good at it? I'm okay. I'm a better designer, right? And really having, really diving into the role that you're considering and understanding it and understanding your level is really important because one of the things that I see I have done hundreds of portfolio reviews and resume reviews is people will put on their resumes or their portfolio like I'm a programmer and I'm a concept artist. You're not,
Hmm.
right? You're one or the other. You can't be both. It's you may be incredibly talented, right? But you're going to have a strong suit. You're going to have something that, that you just do better, right? And I think that really questioning yourself and focusing on the thing that you are strongest at is really important because especially for AAA now, everything is so niche and everything is so specialized. They don't want just designers. They want combat designers. They want encounter designers. They want, and even going further into that, they may want a movement designer, right? You may be trained in level design, but maybe you've, really focused on how characters move or how AI move, and that's your niche. That's your
Hmm.
sweet spot. Whereas when you go into indie development, you can be a little more of a generalist, and that's fine.
Hmm.
But when you're focusing on AAA, a lot of people want I can never say that word. They want you to specialize, right? They want you to be specific. Um, so that is like the first thing. The second thing is really making sure your portfolio focuses on the roles that you're looking for. And the design, the format is really important. I need to be able to look at your portfolio and in 3 seconds, I need to get to your work. I don't want to see the about page first. I want to see your work. Most of the people that are going to take a look at your portfolio have very limited amounts of time. And as you know, with all of the layoffs recently, the market is absolutely flooded with candidates. So you really have to stand out. Um, we don't want to see like portfolios that are just like very busy, lots of patterns, garish colors, black and white and gray. Keep it simple, keep it neutral, make everything easy for me to get to, and you will really stand out a lot more so, and that's really important. So, your portfolio, keeping it focused, keeping it easy to navigate is like really, really important. The other thing I think that I have seen, even veteran designers who I've helped, veteran devs, is they think, oh, well, I have my portfolio, up to par. I don't need to worry about my resume. You absolutely do, right? And it's the same concept. We don't want to see fancy fonts. We don't want to see purple, green, and orange or whatever. Those colors are great. There's nothing wrong with them, but not on your resume. Keep it simple. Kind of keep it like monotone or, monochromatic, whatever. Easy to read. Make sure that, on your resume, if you were applying for a design job, those are the skills that you're talking about in your resume. Another thing is I see quite often is people will just put worked on Call of Duty. Okay,
Hmm.
sure, you worked on Call of Duty, but what did you do? That means nothing to a recruiter. They need to know specifically what you worked on. And of course, you may have to, even students sometimes have to dance around NDAs or, privileged information. But you can still give like a general idea of what you worked on. Well, I focused on the designing of movement, or I focused on AI characters, or I was an artist and I focused on concepts. You can still
Hmm.
give general information without like breaking your NDA. So it's really important to have those types of things. The other thing that is incredibly important and often forgotten, even if a job does not ask for it, write a cover letter. Make it the first page of your resume if you want. If you're only allowed to submit like one document to a job listing, create a PDF, add those pages in and make your cover letter the first thing. Tell me about yourself, and don't do the like downloading the online form. Make it personal. Show me who you are. Tell me that, you volunteer in the community. Tell me your favorite game and why you wanted to get into the industry. Those are the kinds of things that really can make you stand out, and when they're looking for culture and personality fits, they become really important.
Hmm.
So that's definitely something that I can always recommend.
Hmm.
And the last thing is network, network, network. Even if you are not currently looking, network anyway. And one of the most important things I can say about networking is, one, keep it professional. You're not trying to date, you're not trying to make friends, you're building a professional relationship. And in that, it should be a two-way street. Don't just go into, networking with people assuming that you're just going to get something from them. What can you offer, right? Maybe you've seen some of their work and you just want to say, hey, like, I saw your work on whatever, Stardew Valley, I don't know, whoever you're networking with, and say, like, I love this recent update. Or I saw that you were in the credits of God of War. I think, the fighting in that IP is just phenomenal and I love it. So, even if it's just you happen to notice that this person you're networking with shares a similar interest to you, just start a conversation and, just give as much as you receive. And I think that's really
Hmm.
important. Yeah.
I love so much of what you just put down there, especially that last one. Give as much as you receive is
Yeah.
real good. I like to encourage people to think about networking and like mentor building as something like a business to business sale. Like, what is
Yep.
it that the other business, the other party, other person, this
Yep.
potential mentor or connection
Yep.
is getting out of this relationship? And if that
Right.
is not a two-way street, then they'll inevitably disappear. Um,
Yeah.
I want to.
Um,
I always like reducing the expertise of
mhm.
the guest into as fine a bullet point as possible. So tell me if this list sounds right.
Okay.
Your tips to breaking into the game industry go like this: number one, know your niche and establish an actual niche.
Mhm.
Number two is your materials should be simple and navigatable. Number three is the materials should be specialized for the exact role requirements.
Yep.
Number four is you should be writing a personal cover letter. Number five, you should network like a
Yes.
maniac. Does that sound
Yep.
right?
Sounds great.
Sweet. Awesome. Did I miss anything out of that?
No, I don't think so. I think you got it all.
Fantastic. Yeah, there's something else to maybe call out. You talked about the bullet points in a resume. I think I have seen a lot of the same, and there's a um, there's like a change moment that happens when you become the hiring manager, or at least you become the part of a hiring process, where you go from I'm trying to prove that I can be awesome to I'm trying to make sure this project doesn't fall apart. And the minute that that change happens, you don't care so much about the people. Like, yes, absolutely, I'm going to hire people because I like them to some degree, but I care a lot more about making sure they have the skills and abilities that are going to make sure my project doesn't fall apart. And as a result, those bullet points really need to be the proof of that. I actually love on portfolio sites, especially for designers, recommending that you have hidden behind a button so you're not bombarding them with too much information, a little bit of your design process somewhere. So I can pop in and see some of the actual problems you ran into, as well as the ways that you solve them in your process for going through design. There's a tip that Tim Wood, who's the recruiter who runs our takeaway sessions once a month, uses, which is the STAR method. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, Daedra,
It's in
which
my
is
book.
just a method. Oh, nice. Look at that. Perfect. Get Daedra's book. We'll link it down below. But it's a really simple way to think about your bullet points. It's just describe the situation, the task, the action, and the result. So that just means here's the problem that I was faced with, and here is my actual methodology for solving it. That means a lot more than just I made 5 levels. If you can say, I had to design 5 levels that were playable by users with actual like special needs or something like that. Like, what was the actual problem that you ran into and solved? It is a. I'm curious about the networking, especially because I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't do. Um, in my own career, I think every single job I've ever had has come, at least in part, due to some level of due to an actual direct referral, or at least because like I
Okay.
knew somebody who worked there. That's totally fine, or at least because I knew somebody who worked there and they were able to give me a bit of a leg up. How does one actually approach networking when they're just getting started and they don't already have a body of people to sort of rely on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that I started doing in school, so for any of the audience or anyone listening who is in a formal education program, number one is network with your classmates and your instructors because 9 times out of 10, they know a lot more people than you know. And truthfully, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a studio and someone instantly slacks me and is like, "Hey, remember me from our classes?" And, that's an instant connection. Um, the other thing is there's a lot of groups on LinkedIn that focus on game development, that focus on breaking into the industry. Most of the veterans there are there to help, myself included. And I'm part of a lot of those groups. Just reaching out to someone and talking to them, seeing who's really active in those groups is another great way, to sort of suss out whether or not you can add that person. X/Twitter, even Blue Sky can also be a great place to look for other developers. There's a lot of people that I work with who are very active in those on those platforms that love helping new people, and maybe they don't check LinkedIn quite as much, but that's another great platform to reach out. And of course, Discord. Also, most of us are on Discord, especially if you're using a very specific set of tools like Maya, Unreal, Unity. You're going to find a huge community base there. And while you may or may not know if that person is a veteran, they might be. And a lot of times, they're also very active and open to mentoring. Another great place is either the national or the local IGDA group is another great one. So most cities that have a lot of game development will have a local chapter, and you can reach out and kind of network there. Any type of in-person event like conferences, like Willem, you and I met at MDev not long ago. So any kind of
Mhm.
conferences that are local to your area, and they don't have to be the GDCs or, the SIGGRAPHs or whatever. They can be smaller conferences, and you can really, I actually prefer those sometimes because you get a lot of time individually with people. So you can go see their talks, and a lot of times they'll hang out after and, answer any questions or discuss things. They'll have a card, and there you go, instant connection. So,
Mhm. Awesome. Those are all really good tips. I think like one of the biggest things for everybody to hear is it's okay if you're uncomfortable. So are most people,
Yep. Yeah.
and it really doesn't take a lot. Even if you're uncomfortable, you can make fantastic
Yep.
connections.
True.
I want to echo the. It doesn't have to be the GDCs. I feel like some of my best connections were from little baby local events or just like a board game night. I literally met a board game publisher who I didn't work with but consulted with, just going to a board game night in my local
Absolutely.
area. Like it happens. Yeah, it doesn't need to be anything special. Just get out there and
Nope.
get amongst the community as much as possible.
Very true. And yeah, and another thing I discuss in my book as well is if you are somebody who suffers from anxiety, believe it or not, like I have spoken to groups of hundreds to even thousands of people, and I'm actually somewhat shy, like just talking to new people just in person. But I hide it really well. So I give a lot of tips as well. Especially if you're like me and you're neurodivergent, it can
Mhm.
be really stressful, just having to get out there and just like, hey, I'm Daedra, I like what you do, can I do this too? It's so awkward. So I do give a lot of tips to help with that as well, and there are things that you can do to kind of like calm that anxiety down and just help you.
Mhm.
And most people in this industry can relate, so they're not
Yes.
going to judge you.
One of the things that is awesome about this industry is we're all a bunch
Yes.
of weirdos. Like part of the reason
Yes.
we make or care about games is because we're all kind of outcasts.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, here's one question that I run into all the time working with students here. This is a huge junior question and a huge junior pushback. The one of the first things you said, one of the first things out of your mouth was, "You got to know your niche," and you acknowledged that indies are a little bit more general and that AAA's are a little bit more specific. But yeah, I run into so many of those. So many people who are like, "Well, I'm a developer. I animate and I do sound and I, make cool stuff, and also I know how to program a little bit." And that's all well and good. And in fact, I think is really strong for you to have some level of knowledge in many areas. There's the whole T-shaped experience. Like you should have a little bit in all the areas that you can communicate with other people, but you absolutely need depth in just one area, and especially in the AAA more like professional sphere. The more specific, the better. So, how do you answer when people are like, "Well, I care about both of those things or all three of these things. What do I focus on?" How do you answer that?
Yeah. So one of the first things I tell like students or people interested in certain career paths is you need, first of all, you need to experience that particular career, even if it's just in your own little world, right? If you
Hmm.
want to be a modeler, you need to get into Maya. You can't just sit there and go, okay, I really like the idea of modeling. Let me just go try that out, or let me just, I want to work toward that. You need to get into the software. You need to teach yourself some things. Learn if it's an area of frustration. Learn if, are you good at it? Are you not good at it? Get feedback from the community, whether that's on Discord, LinkedIn, and really listen to that feedback. That is one of the hardest things, I think. And of course, all of us feel like a lot of times feedback can be personal attacks, and it isn't, right? Like I'm a fantastic designer. I'm not an artist, right? I'm just not. I can get away with some modeling. um it can pass, but it's not good. And originally that was my focus. I wanted to be an artist, and I had to have like a really tough conversation with myself and just like look at all of the people out there who are in the job that I want, and I just knew that I didn't have it, right? But I love design as much, and I knew when I compared my work to designers out there, I was as good. And so that was kind of for me, that was kind of the way I chose. But one of the things I think is super important is research and feedback. And, something that I can't express enough is that, you know, you have to practice whatever role that you want every day like it's a job. When
Hmm.
I was studying to be a level designer, I gave up a lot of things, time with my kids, time with my family, playing games. I gave it up for like a long time because I had to spend anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day honing that craft. And something else I talk about in my book as well is when you do play games, even if it's for fun, put your developer hat on, right? As a designer, I will start playing games and I'm like, why did they make that choice? I'll take my fangirl hat off for a little while, and just look at things like Horizon Zero Dawn. I'll play that game and then I'll go, the first game was better. I just, I really need to take a look at how, they were designing this particular space because I don't agree with the choices they made. And I'll
Hmm.
actually have a notebook sitting on my coffee table and I'll make notes of different games. Like,
Hmm.
how did they do this well? How could they improve? Do I like this from a player standpoint? And then I'll think about it from a design standpoint or even from an art standpoint. Like, not throwing shade on Horizon Zero Dawn 2, but the lighting, I was like, bro, what are you guys doing? I feel like laser beams are coming at my face right now. So, it's just things like that. I just take a look at and, I constantly have that feedback in my head, both for my own things and for other, games out there and other designs. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I love that there's I've heard that referred to as design journaling, and I think that that's valuable absolutely as a designer, but for anyone. You are all developers now, which means you no longer are allowed to enjoy your video games. You need to think about
True.
them, play them, be discerning about them. And you, of course, can have periods where you don't care and you just play the game. That's fine. But I encourage you to do the just what Daedra is talking about, exactly what Daedra is talking about. I too have a gameplay journal that I just keep near at hand when I'm playing games, and if I have thoughts or notice things, I will write them down. One of the reasons that note taking is even common in schools is because it's a second moment for your brain to digest that information. You're both thinking it and then writing it, and even if you never look at that note again, which you probably will, you have a second moment for your brain to remember it, and therefore you're thinking more deeply about exactly this: what makes a game work and what doesn't make it work. In terms of niche, my biggest piece of advice that I always give is just it's okay if you have a lot of things you're interested in. Pick one, try it. It doesn't have to be forever. You don't need to be scared that you're going to be pigeonholed for the rest of your life. People change all the time. It's normal.
It
Just
is
jump into
very
one.
normal. I have
Yeah.
done that very thing. When I started at ZeniMax, I was a social designer, and I've
Hmm.
moved back to multiplayer design. So there's no shame in that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So yeah,
Nothing wrong with it. Happens all the time.
yep,
Especially once you're already established and trusted somewhere, it's actually often easier to make the
yep,
transition.
absolutely.
All right. I think if I'm listening correctly,
Question of the day.
wow, we're about to switch into community questions. Before then, though, we have our question of the day, which is where we reiterate one of the most important points that we learned from our guest. So, audience, type this in the chat for us. If you're listening, speak it out loud. What are Daedra's 5 most important points to break into the video game industry? Write them out for us. The first person to get it correct will get a couple of House Cup points. In the meantime, I have our first community question from Vishnu. Networking, that's only one of 5. We're missing we're missing 4 of them. I'll give it to you if you get 3. I'll give it to you if you give 3. People are still typing. We'll get it in a second. I'm going to get Vishnu's first question, and then I will announce whoever got the comment question of the day. So our very first question is from Vishnu. If I can find it, Vishnu asks, should I create separate portfolios and resumes for different roles within game development and beyond? And how can I make them stand out to employers?
Absolutely should. But I'm going to circle back to what I said before. Make sure that okay, really quick, just maybe you can clarify, Vishnu. You're talking about separate portfolios for different companies or for different roles? Because there's absolutely a difference there. If you're talking about for different roles, okay,
Mhm.
right. I still want to say you should focus on one role or the other, but if you absolutely are just, man, you're just a rock star, right? And you're both a programmer and artist and you're just a badass, then yes, you should make separate portfolios, not even on the same website, right? Like you should have like Vishnu's art, Vishnu's programming, right? Completely separate. Um, as far as the look and the design and standing out, again, just make sure everything's really legible, everything's very clear in terms of what the role is you're going for. Also make sure, like Willem discussed before, have something about your process, right? What is your process as a programmer? What's your process as an artist? And make sure that when you are showing your different portfolio work, that you're digging into that a little bit. You don't need to have like 6 pages on what you've done. It could be a couple paragraphs. That's enough. But just showing kind of how you get to where you are and like how you deal with problems, how you resolve issues, things like that would be great. Yeah, it's a great question.
Awesome. If I don't know if I missed it there, would you recommend different portfolios for just different jobs? Like not even, I'm saying like actually different roles that you're applying for, even if they're the same type of role?
No. So
Yeah.
like if you're a
Sounds like a lot of
level,
work.
yeah, if you're a level artist and say you're applying to Gearbox versus like Call of Duty, right? Those are
Right.
very different IPs. My recommendation there is having one portfolio, but you can do different projects, right? So maybe you
Hmm.
do like a level art project that kind of has the cell shading that's like Gearbox, and then you do a level art project that's very grounded in reality, like COD. That would be my suggestion there. But
Yeah.
no, you don't need to have for resumes, potentially cover letters 100%. You need to have
Hmm.
an individual new cover letter for every role. Do not do like you can have some of the basics, right? Like your initial intro paragraph and maybe your conclusion might be similar,
Hmm.
but you should cater every single cover letter to the specific role. But your resume and
Yeah.
your portfolio, no, you don't need to do that. That's a lot.
Yeah, I feel like there's sort of there's a balance. I've received advice from people before. I'm always generally an advocate for quantity effect when you're looking for roles, especially when you're a junior. Just try to get your face in your application in as many places that seem you have enough skill to be viable for. But I've also heard people go for like quality first. They only go for one role. They'll cater everything to that one role. They'll go live in the community and try to talk developers for that one role. And I've heard some amount of success from that. You know, you could maybe argue that like if I'm applying to Gearbox versus if I'm applying for a first person shooter versus a puzzle platformer or something, I might have different versions of my portfolio for that, and that might help you land the job. But I
Yeah.
do think that of course there's a reality at some point of
Yeah.
like your time
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
long are you willing to spend on one application.
Exactly. I do think, like if and it depends on your role, right? Because like you said, level design for a puzzle game is very different from a first person shooter. And in that
Mhm.
respect, I think you do really need to decide. Like I'm really good at first person shooters. I mean, that's my bag personally. So I'm
Mhm.
always going to focus on that role, right? I can design levels for puzzle games and I have. Um, but I don't cater my portfolio to that because that's just really not what I'm interested in. So yeah,
Yeah. I think that, by the way, people get stressed about that one too. Being in a specific genre or sort of realm of genres, a type of game is pretty normal. So somebody will be very good at puzzle games versus very good at
yeah,
first-person shooters. I tend, for instance, one of my specialties is educational games. I do a ton of educational stuff. Um, some people will get stressed about picking that. I find, for the most part, that kind of just happens naturally.
yeah,
Um,
it does.
you don't really need to pick it. When you're earlier in your career, it'll also matter a little bit less because we aren't expecting you to have a decade of experience. So yeah, you'll just find, man, I've worked on a ton of first-person shooters and I enjoy it. I guess that's what I do.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So Art Muse managed to nail the question of the day, and that is the 5 most important tips for landing a job in the game industry. So that is number 1, know and pick your niche. Number 2, your materials should be simple and navigatable. Number 3, your materials should be specialized for the exact role and its requirements, which here's another quick tip. Just go look at the job description. Whatever tech they're asking for, whatever skills they're looking for, practice those. Crazy, I know. Number 4, write a personal cover letter. I love, by the way, that you advocate for this. Some recruiters don't because of the whole bias conversation, but I'm
Yep.
like, if it can help you land the job, do it. I
And it
don't know.
can, it really can.
It's
Yeah,
helped me before. Yeah.
same.
I've been in interviews. I love mentioning Warhammer 40K. It's one of my favorite things in the universe. I've been in interviews before where we get dorky about Warhammer 40K because I mentioned it in the cover letter. It's a real thing. And number 5, network absolutely as hard, as much, as crazy as you can because it matters so much. And think about that two-way street. How can you provide value in your networking to the other person? All right, it's time for question number 2. We got Rick patiently waiting on stage. Rick, would you ask your second question about like how much prep you should be doing?
Showcasing your work and showing the steps and methods. Yeah, so but I really liked how you brought up when you're applying, like showcase how you do the work. So my question is about demonstrating your steps and methodologies. Like if I'm going to be doing a specific role, these are the steps that I'm taking. Like what's the right amount of detail that I should offer? What's too much?
Right. That's a great question. So first and foremost, document what you do as you're creating something, right? Whether it's art, design, whatever. Take those work in progress shots, save them for later. Don't initially post them on your portfolio. That's the first thing. But do hang on to those so you can show people. Like if you're an artist, right? You know, show things like if you're modeling, show the mesh flow, show um, you know, your texture maps, show like your low poly mesh before you bake your high poly, or if you're a designer, show your block out. You know, just even adding things like, hey, this is the reference image, right? Whether it's a reference image for a level design, for a mechanic, for anything. Even if it's just, hey, I took these comps, or we call them comps in the industry, but like comparative analysis of other games. Like I wanted to create a mechanic like Horizon Zero Dawn, right? I love the way this particular mechanic works. This is my reference. And you know, you grab something off YouTube, like a small snippet of the actual thing you're trying to design for, and include that. As far as how much detail you should go into, consider the fact that hiring managers and recruiters have very limited time. So keep it to like a few paragraphs. You don't need like a dissertation on what you've done, right? Because the other thing you want to do, you want to hit the main points of your process, right? You want to talk about the software you've used. You want to talk about where you got into some trouble and how you resolved it. But you don't want to go step by step, right? Because you actually want to keep something back for the interview. You want to have something to talk about. And if you've given them everything on your portfolio, you don't really have a lot to discuss. And it's just going to feel like you're rehashing the same things again in your interview. So, yeah, just as you're reading through, I say, you know, for like your process descriptions, try to keep it at under like a 5 minute read if possible. You know, keep it around 3 minutes. That's usually enough.
Do you think like making little videos that can be like a 60-second summary are viable, or are they just not going to watch
Absolutely.
videos?
Yep. Yep. So one of the things that I did early in my portfolio as well is I actually did little snippets, exactly what you're talking about, where I talked over my design choices, right? Instead of writing out these huge, long, involved paragraphs, I just, you know, they were like a minute to 3 minutes, and I just kind of talked about like, hey, this is why I placed these AI here. This is what I was going toward. This was my inspiration, etc. And they really commented on how much they love that. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea.
Excellent.
That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah, that's one of the hard things. Like I can imagine from a recruiter's perspective, it's like, okay, I want to bring this person in. When we install them, like how will they do what we need them to do? And that's
Mhm.
cool. Thank you.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you, Rick, for the question. That's really one of the biggest ones. You know, like I said, at some point you start thinking about your team or your company or your game. And in this industry, it's so easy to get canceled, to have your game not make it out the door.
Yep.
And so when you have any kind of authority in who you hire, the first thing you're thinking is, will this person add to the equation and make this game more likely to succeed? And so, yes, you know, we want to know that like you worked on this cool game that got released or whatever. But what we really want to know is like, man, we're solving this very specific problem, and do I think this person can solve that problem or contribute to solving this problem? Awesome.
Exactly.
All right. Major Bacon asked for some clarification. So I mentioned some bias surrounding, or just a conversation surrounding bias on your portfolio. Um, do you have any thoughts on that? The two things that I've heard in contention are, one, you shouldn't have a picture of yourself anywhere on your portfolio or your resume because that might introduce bias. Number two, even having like a blurb, like an intro, like here's who I am. I've heard more and more often you shouldn't have on your portfolio. And then now even cover letters people are talking about for that same reason. It shouldn't matter who you are. It should only matter what your experience is. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. Uh, People are people, and as much as we would love everybody to be kind and loving and caring, they're not. Truth.
Mhm.
don't put your picture on your resume or your cover letter
Mhm.
ever. In fact, I even discourage putting personal pronouns. That is just my personal preference. I just don't want to subject myself to any form of bias whatsoever. So I just don't do it. In terms of having your picture and even like a blurb about yourself on your portfolio, I think it's fine, but it shouldn't be the landing page and it should be in an about page. Again, that's totally your choice, whether or not you want to include a picture. But I definitely like to see information about the person, like, in terms of like, why are they wanting to get into the industry? What are they passionate about? Do they share like the same interest as me? Like, as a designer, I love to see that other people are interested in architecture, right? Because instantly I know, okay, this person's going to understand form and function. They're going to understand grounding things in reality for designs, and I love that, right? And I'm sure the same is true for people who are looking to hire artists. Like if you start throwing out like Picasso and that you trained in traditional art, and maybe you're a sculptor in your spare time, people are going to love that kind of stuff. So, you know, basically it's a very personal decision in terms of like how much you want to put out into the world. Are recruiters going to look at your about page? Probably not. They're going to look at your work mostly. Um, but that's just my take. I do
Yeah.
have my picture on my portfolio, but I don't include it on my resume. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a good. I think honestly that was a good answer, and your answer was kind of like, probably. And I think that is the
Yeah.
answer. It's very unlikely that having the picture, just like literally the act of having a photo of yourself, is going to affect. Is going to stop you from getting a job. So some people in the chat are asking about whether or not they should remove their picture from LinkedIn. Absolutely don't
No.
do that. Leave your
Oh,
picture on LinkedIn.
yes.
Yes. And even removing your picture, I think, yes, don't have it on your resume. The resume, like the whole purpose of a resume is here is my history, here are the projects. And so in that case, it makes a lot of sense that there's nothing on there. I probably would advocate for keeping it on your portfolio. I like the idea of putting it in an about section so it's not like in your face first thing you see. But yeah, I think really the only takeaway from this, in my opinion, is just remember that bias is a thing, unfortunately, and it will affect you. And you should seek to avoid that. And that's really as much as we can say, I think.
We'll say this though.
Mhm.
Also understand and know that if you, I mean, this is tricky, but it's also illegal. You
Yes.
can't, you cannot, like, you cannot prohibit somebody from getting a job based on their race, religion, gender identity, etc. Can you prove it? No. Like, but just bear in mind, like, if you ever experience something that is absolutely egregious, like, just know that that is illegal.
Yes. Yeah. If it actually happens, or if somebody like admits to that being why you didn't get hired or something, you can take them to court.
Yes.
But also, you don't want to work there anyway if someone is actually there.
Right.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Exactly.
All right, we've got two more questions. The first one here is from Wendy. Wendy asks, "Would love to hear your take on transferring from another industry and breaking in." Another super common one I hear all of the time. What is
Yeah.
your take on transferring in?
Um, I think one of the neatest things, just transferring into games is a lot easier than some people think. One of the things I always recommend, depending on what industry you're in, right? For example, I had a mentee who wanted to get into game production, and they actually worked for a large retail chain, and ultimately their role was a producer. They were a manager, and they were already doing production. So one of the first things, again, research the role, right? What are the
Hmm.
common things your current position or your current industry shares with games? I've talked to actually again producers that were in TV and movies, and they reached out and they're like, "Well, how do I get into games?" And I'm like, "Well, you're already doing production, so just look for the commonality and see how it relates to the role that you want to get into." Um, Even if you're like, for example, let's say you work at UPS or FedEx, right? And you want to be a designer. Well, how can you translate what you do? Maybe you load trucks. How can you translate that into level design, right? Well, you have to think about space, right? So you're thinking about spatial arrangement. You're thinking about conveyor belts. You're thinking about timing and pacing to get those boxes onto the truck, to fill the truck properly, to make sure that there's ingress and egress points from the truck, from the facility. So you can take any job and you can translate that into the game industry. You just have to really take notes and think about it, and just see how you can relate that position into the industry, and always get feedback from other people, and just see what they say about your resume and everything else. So yeah.
That's a good, solid answer. I think I sometimes I feel like people are trying to figure out, does this work or does this not work? Is this the right way or is this the wrong way? There's often no right or wrong way. There's often no like correct or incorrect way. It's more like a tier list or something where like this is going to be the best that people are the most impressed by, and this will matter a little bit, and this will matter less, but still matters, and this just doesn't matter. And any amount of experience outside of games that is applicable still matters. It just, of
Yep.
course, is going to matter less than like, here's an actual ship project where I did exactly what I would be doing for you. But yeah, anything that you can successfully argue, matters or applies to your skill set, can be added to the resume, can be added to the portfolio. So if you don't have shipped titles yet, or if you only have sort of personal projects, those matter. And so does learning level design from packing trucks or whatever. In fact, I often this is sort of this is a personal anecdote, so it's less. I don't have like statistical evidence for this, but I often really like that if somebody can come in and say, here's a level design. I'm applying for a level design position. I don't have a ton of level design experience, but here is what I've learned about level design from these other things I've done in my life. I really like that because it shows that you're thoughtful. It shows that you are trying to figure out that you are thinking about level design and growing your skill set. And it shows also that you're probably going to have an alternative perspective, which I tend to really value. And that's all good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. I love it. Like I said, I love hearing. I know someone mentioned in the chat about architecture and LD. Like, I love hiring people, or pushing for hiring people that have architectural experience, because I know they're
Mhm.
going to think about design and buildings and creating things in a very solid fashion. And like you said, I love having different perspectives, because I think sometimes when you get people that have just been in the industry so long, they kind of get jaded a bit. And so it's nice to have somebody kind of mix things up a little and say, hey, did you think about this, or doing things? Why aren't we trying doing it in this way? Because in my industry, prior to this is what we did. So yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah, love it. All right, I think it's going to be the last question of the day, and this I think should be a pretty straightforward one. Art Muse asks, when someone's working on a more long-term project that's still under development, would you recommend that they put it on their portfolios? Obviously, while not breaking NDAs, or should it only be in a different section, completed, shipped projects, etc.?
That's a great question, and it comes up a lot. So in my book, I have a list called the D&D list, which is the do not do, and that is on the list. Do not put work in progress on your portfolio. So yeah, I know we all get excited. We want to show different things. Unless there's aspects of that project that are complete and can be looked at and are seen as like completely done. So for example, like if you're creating an entire game, right? Maybe you've got some models that are finished, or you've got levels that are finished. In that sense, you can showcase those models, right? And you can talk about the fact that it bleeds into a larger project that isn't finished. That's fine. But if you're wanting, yeah, if you have like the model itself and you're like, oh, I'm only done with the low poly. No, you need to have the whole thing finished before, because something I talk about again is you're going to be judged on your worst work always. And that's what they're going to remember. And if it is incomplete, they're not going to be able to accurately judge what you've done, because maybe there are mistakes in there that you realize later and you go back and fix. Well, they're not going to remember that. They're just going to remember the mistake. So you want to make sure that like whatever you post on your portfolio is complete. Um, and the other part of the question you mentioned, Is it okay to have it in a separate part of your portfolio? Absolutely. If you have like a blog page and you want to just like mention, hey, this is my current project. It's not complete yet, but I'm working on it. That's fine. That's absolutely okay. They can then look at the progress as you go and check it out and understand that it's a work in progress. But you shouldn't have it on like your landing page or your portfolio page. Just keep that to a blog or to a separate page, and that's fine.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've heard different perspectives on this one. I think at the very least, delineating that this is an incomplete project and showcasing the ones that are complete first is important. Something we haven't mentioned yet, but this is one of the pieces of advice I give all the time is don't show everything. Don't show all of your past projects because inevitably a bunch of those are going to be weak or non-applicable or whatever. I usually only advocate for putting the maybe 3 to 5 projects on the portfolio, and you can have another section of your site that's like, here's everything. But
Yeah.
you really want to. The metaphor I always give is like, think about designing a level. You wouldn't have 12 pathways in your level where 7 of them are super boring and crappy. You'd have 3 that are all interesting and awesome. So yeah. Don't put everything. Just put the stuff that you think is absolute primo, cream of the crop, and then if you want, you can have another section that's like, here's everything I've worked on since I was 12.
Yeah.
I'm not advertising my 15-year-old Flash games.
Right, exactly. And I always advocate quality over quantity, just like you said. 3 to 5 is a lot, honestly. Like
Mm,
I've seen people get hired over 2. And
mm,
that's totally fine. Like I would rather see like even one solid quality project. I would hope for 2 to 3, right? Um, but if I see even in a past post, because this is the thing, if you put it on your site, they're gonna look at it and they're gonna go, oh, look what they did then. It's not very good. And, even if that was like 15-year-old you, they don't have the context for what you did there. They're still going to judge you on it. So I
mhm.
actually, I prefer if people don't put all their work on their site. Like you said, 3 to 5 is fantastic. Shoot for that number. Keep them, high quality and curate your portfolio often. Like go through and look at
Yeah.
your stuff and just go, hey, this is about 10 years old, and I'm victim to that too. Like once you get in the industry, you like forget about it, and I need to do that myself. But if you have work on there that's like 10 years old and it doesn't stand up, think about adding a new project. Try out something different, and just make sure that you're keeping your highest quality and most recent stuff up. Yeah.
Yep. Love that. All right. We are at the end of the episode. This has been a fantastic talk. Before we say goodbye, we've got 2 things to do. The first one, as always, is we love to assign homework in this podcast. So, what is something, Daedra, that they can do in the next week or so that'll take them about an hour to practice some of what we talked about here?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I have a couple things. First and foremost is what I want you to do is hone in on your niche, right? Figure out where you want to focus your career. Create a OneNote. It could be a Google Doc. It can be like a Word document, whatever. But I want you to keep that as a living document. I want you to do some research on the roles, whether that's looking at GDC talks, looking up things on YouTube, Discord channels, whatever it is. Make notes. Give yourself like a chart or a bulleted list of things that you've already achieved that you can currently do for this role, right? So like if this role requires that you have Unreal experience and you've got that, mark that down, right? If the role requires that you have some knowledge in traditional art, if you have that, list it. If you don't, see how you can go about like finding out more information on getting those skills.
Mm,
And then something I always advocate to everybody is spend some time every week, mark that time down and research this particular job that you're interested in, right? Whether
mm,
that's spending half an hour in engine doing things, or if that's half an hour researching on how does a game design document work, right? What's included? What do I need? Um, Whatever it is, if it's programming, spend half an hour coding or learning about how to code in a particular language. Mark that time down, put a summary in this living document, and talk about what you learned, what your takeaways were, and how you want to proceed next. So, first assignment, create that document. Try to understand, what it is that you're moving toward. And then the second assignment is get on LinkedIn, get your portfolio up there, have a picture. Even if you're not ready to apply for things, that's okay. But just get your portfolio up and listed. And if you want, reach out to me. You can connect with me. I can be your first network contact, and I'm always happy to chat with people. So definitely feel you can reach out to me there or on Discord, of course. But yeah, start thinking about networking. Something I also recommend is start messaging people that are in the role that you want, whether that's on Twitter or LinkedIn or Blue Sky, wherever you feel comfortable reaching out. And if you're not sure what to say or what to ask, um, start with just hello, right? Say who you are, like you're a budding developer or you're in another industry and you're really interested in getting into the game industry. Just give a couple sentences about who you are, why you're reaching out. Um, and as that conversation progresses, another great question that I always tell people to ask is you ask your contact, like this new connection, if you knew what you knew today about being, whether it's programmer, designer, whatever, what would you tell your past self? Right?
Hmm.
That's a fantastic question, and I'll post it later in the chat once we're finished. And that's a great question because people will go, oh, wow, yeah, well, I wish I would have known X, Y, and Z. Like for me as a designer, one of the things I think on when I was starting out is I made entire games and I didn't need to. I just needed a block out, right? So as a level designer, I really pushed things way further than I needed to at the time. So yeah, just questions like that are great. They can really kind of open up the conversation and really, get some information that you need. So yeah.
Amazing. All right, I am going to let me try to distill this down because I love holding people a little bit accountable to this homework. So make a doc, a living document. That is your career progression doc. In that doc, we want to define what your niche is, write out what your currently applicable skills are, and what skills you still need to practice. And once again, the way that you find these is you just go and look at those roles you really want and see what's listed on there. Compare half a dozen of them and see what everybody is asking for, see what gets asked for a little bit less. Number 3, spend a half an hour a week building up this skill. Include this in this doc. Write down some of what you've learned. And then once you've done that, we want you to post that doc. This is my request. Post that doc to LinkedIn or whatever you are comfortable sharing. You could give us maybe a summary on LinkedIn write-up if you're uncomfortable sharing the whole doc. And then tag us, the Indie Game Academy, me, Willem Delventhal, and of course, Daedra Christopher. We'll get excited for you. That way we'll be able to connect a little bit. And then your secondary homework is to LinkedIn like a champion. LinkedIn is incredible. My last 2 or 3 jobs were from LinkedIn. Daedra has had the same experience. It really is almost a necessary tool at this point in time. So start hitting up some people that you might be able to learn from and ask them what they would tell their previous self. People love talking about themselves in their career, I promise. Does that all sound right, Daedra?
Sounds perfect.
Awesome. All right. If you're uncomfortable to post your homework, by the way, to LinkedIn, we encourage you to post it to LinkedIn. It will only help you, and it's good to be a little bit public about what you're doing. But if you're uncomfortable with that, you can always just post it here in the Discord. There's links to join down below. Okay, now this is the very end. We're going to give you a chance to promote anything you'd like and give any last words of wisdom, Daedra. But before then, I would love if you would start with your book's title and where we can get it.
Yeah, so the book isn't out yet. It's still with the editor. But the title is I know. She's taking too long, damn her. No, it's it's titled Achievement Unlocked Breaking into the Game Industry. So it should be out this year. So I'm excited for that. And yeah.
Awesome.
And as far as
anything else? Anything else like to promo? Any last words of wisdom?
Network. It's so important. It's absolutely so important. And I guess one of the other things is always be receptive to feedback and understand that it isn't personal. It only helps you grow and become a better developer.
Such a good one. It is really, it's another one that I run into so often with our students in our level 3 program. We spend a lot of time actually practicing getting bad feedback. It's really easy to get hurt and caught up in your own ability, but always remember that every time everybody gives you a negative feedback, air quotes that you can't see, listeners. If somebody gives you a negative feedback, that's really good. That is in general more valuable than positive feedback. Positive feedback is great. We feel great. But for us to actually grow and become better, we need negative feedback. All feedback is good feedback unless it's trolling. So yes, be open to
Absolutely.
it. It's all good. We promise. All right. It is time to say goodbye. Daedra, thank you so much for your time. What a wonderful way to kick off 2025. Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
absolutely. Thank you, listeners. And as always, if you enjoyed, we ask that you send it along to one other person who may enjoy too. We'll see you again next week, Wednesday at 12 p.m. Bye, everybody.